Since the end of 2025, Minneapolis has been under occupation by federal agents.
We're all human beings here. I don't give a shit who you are, where you came from, what color you are. It doesn't fucking matter. This is wrong.
I'm a filmmaker who lives in San Francisco, but I'm originally from the Midwest, and I have friends in Minneapolis. One of them is Megan. Not only is she a resident there, but she also happens to hold a PhD in media studies. Of course, when I saw what was happening there, I gave her a call, and what she told me felt like info every American should know. So we decided to share these conversations with y'all and hope to get real info out there about what's been happening in Minneapolis and how we might be able to learn how to come together. Join us for the What Now on YouTube. Hi, welcome back to the What Now. This is Kristina, and I'm here with Megan, and we're back again to discuss Minneapolis history and social movements. But first, before we kind of get into our big topic, we wanted to give some updates about what's been going on in Minneapolis since we last recorded. The date today is March 1st. And we last recorded a week ago. So we have some clips and some updates about what's been going on. Maybe Megan, you want to start by talking about what's been happening on the ground there, just generally since the last week, especially since ICE is supposed to have been leaving at this point?
Well, Chrissy, I can tell you that they are still very much here. We haven't seen a lot of leaving, as one might expect. We have had a couple pretty quiet weeks, and the early part of this last week, the kind of like, what have been the 24th, 25th of February, is still quiet. But later in the week, we did see kind of a little bit of a return to some of the earlier tactics where they're in fewer suburbs and more in St. Paul in particular, and some of the same areas that they hit very hard at the beginning of Operation Metro Surge, and also some of the parts of South and Northeast Minneapolis that they were into. They were back on Central Avenue, which is a very busy ethnic business corridor in Northeast Minneapolis, and did unfortunately abduct, I think, one person off of Central Avenue. So we've seen that. And there've been a lot of reports of large amounts of vehicles in and out of the Whipple building, kind of like 50 vehicles in one day leaving the building and things like that. So definitely not seeing a drawdown as such.
What would you say the sentiment seems like there?
The sentiment is definitely, people are a little tired for sure. I think there's been a little bit of returning back to focusing on other things, and again, it has been a little bit quieter. So I think normal life is resuming a little bit, especially for those of us who are less at risk for being abducted or detained by ICE. And I will say a lot of the BIPOC folks that have been sheltering in place, and to give you kind of an idea in a nutshell, I would imagine 50 to 75,000 people in the metro area have been sheltering in place for almost 2 months now, because we are hitting March 1st. So that would have been about, all of February, all of January, and some probably even into December. So those folks, I think many of them are not comfortable coming out yet, and there's been relatively little change in life for them. I work with a woman who didn't want to leave her house to get a blender. So she wanted one for smoothies, and she's like, I really just want some smoothies, but I can't go anywhere. And she's an older lady, so I don't know that the Amazon's her jam, but so that those sort of stories are still alive and well here right now.
Wow. I don't think that people probably know how large of a number that is of people that have been sheltering in place there.
Yeah, it's large, and I think the metro area is about 1.5 million, if I had to guess. So even if you take 10% of that, right, that's a large number of people.
So we have some clips that are kind of like about the update, and so I'll bring up the first one.
This is our congressional representatives. Two of them did ask to tour the Whipple Federal Building, where they've been holding detainees in the Twin Cities, and They had to wait 8 days to get into the facility and take a tour. And the clip will sort of show you what they found or saw.
We went into the facility and there was not a single detainee that we could see or talk to. Every cell, every inch of it was completely empty.
Shenanigans. And just to add what Representative Omar said, there's a group called Haven Watch that has been receiving folks as they come out of detention. They've been being released in the dead of night in very cold temperatures with no coats, no phones, no documents, no wallets, things like that. So the group that's been sort of providing support for detainees being released is saying that detainees are still coming out. So there's quite a bit of a disconnect between what was seen on the tour and what the reports are sort of from others on the ground over there.
This is from Status Quo, which, like, if you're looking for good info about what's going on in Minneapolis, they have done a lot of live streams during a lot of the protests and stuff. And so if you're ever interested in seeing what one of those protests where they're beating the drums outside the hotel looks like, they have it on there. So if you're curious, they're also like an indie news outlet. And so this is a clip from them about how ICE is changing its tactics.
Operations are out of the headlines in a lot of major corporate outlets, but that doesn't mean that the pain and suffering in a lot of the cities that the Trump administration has victimized over the last many months is over. Far from it. I can tell you from my own reporting and talking to sources on the ground in Minneapolis that immigration enforcement operations are still very much underway, especially in the Minneapolis suburbs right now. It seems that ICE has decreased the amount of operations it's doing within the city itself to try and take the spotlight off of Minneapolis a little bit while still inflicting pain on the suburbs and also on the activists themselves who have been demonstrating against the Trump administration. But it's not just my reporting. There is also other outlets that are backing this up. Let's go now to this reporting from the Huffington Post that says, ICE campaign of terror is not over, says Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey. But while there's anecdotal evidence of fewer immigration and customs enforcement actions around Minneapolis, federal agents are still very present and residents are still terrified. Quote, it certainly hasn't stopped, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey said in a Thursday interview. I fully understand why people are very much on edge. Frey said that he gets daily reports on ICE activity in the city, but it's not objective data because ICE doesn't share its information with his office. Instead, his team tracks the number of residents calling into 911 with reports of family members getting kidnapped by federal agents, for example, or ICE slamming somebody on a car. When police respond to these calls and confirm ICE is on the scene, they file a report and the mayor's office flags it. A few reasons why this might not necessarily be reliable information to go by here is that, one, people have been losing a lot of faith in Mayor Jacob Frey there in Minneapolis and in the police to be able to protect them and keep them safe in their neighborhood. So they may just be reporting less on top of immigration operations also decreasing in their frequency. But I will also note that, as I have heard from people on the ground there, because this way of reporting data that you are hearing right there, Mayor Jacob Frey layout, is only for the city of Minneapolis and not for any of the communities surrounding it, what might be happening is that immigration enforcement actions are happening in St. Paul or happening in the suburbs, as I have heard.
I think that it's great that this clip is talking about the suburbs and the other parts of Minneapolis, because a lot of people watching this are probably don't know about the actual physical layout of Minneapolis and how actually big it is, and how there's also St. Paul and how there's also all of these other suburbs around it. And that's part of our topic today too, is like, we're going to show some maps. You'll see the kind of more the lay of the land. If you've never been to Minneapolis or the Twin Cities, like, you have no idea what it's like. So yeah, like, while in Minneapolis proper, people may be feeling like the ICE presence has decreased. in other
Yeah.
parts of the city, it's not true.
You know, that kind of white colored area is about the range that ICE has been in and out of. And that is probably 15 miles, 15-mile radius. So 15 miles in any direction of where it says Minneapolis. So geographically, it's quite large. And there have been a few reports of them into Wisconsin, right off of I-94, which runs directly east-west. Yep,
Yeah,
right there.
this-
So they've had them reports as far as Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And a lot of the agents themselves are staying at hotels in Wisconsin
Yeah.
due to the noise demonstrations and things like that. So it's a large, you know, geographic area. And I will say, you know, a lot of the suburbs, especially just north of the city and just south of the city, like the first ring suburbs, have extremely diverse populations, and that's, you know, changed a lot within the last 20 years or so. Columbia Heights, where Liam Ramos was and his dad were detained and taken, is one of the most diverse school districts in the Twin Cities. About 50 different languages are spoken in the Columbia Heights school system. So it's extremely.
Wow, 50 languages. That's wild.
Yep. Yeah, and there's, you know, a lot of East African students, a lot of Eastern European students. We have a huge Ukrainian population in Minneapolis and the surrounding suburbs, and have for, you know, a long time. So there's a lot more diversity, and especially in some of those suburbs these days.
We have a couple more clips here. We have one about more people being arrested for protesting.
And I believe this would have been like February 27th, so just a couple days ago.
More people have now been charged in connection to protesting inside a St. Paul church in January. 9 others have already been charged, including former CNN anchor Don Lemon. Attorney General Pam Bondi says 25 of the new defendants were taken into custody by federal agents on Friday, with the additional arrests expected. All 39 defendants are charged with conspiracy against rights of religious freedom at a place of worship, as well as acting to injure, intimidate, and interfere with exercise of right of religious freedom at a place of worship. 25 of the new defendants made their first court appearance today at the St. Paul Federal Courthouse.
And I think it's important to note that they're bringing federal charges against the folks at that demonstration. So the directive has come from Pam Bondi, the Attorney General herself, and that all of those people are being charged with a federal crime.
About the Medicaid funding. So this clip is about mental health services sound the alarm on federal government withholding Medicare funding.
One of the big question marks in the state budget is Medicaid funding.
This week, the federal government announced it's freezing $260 million in payments to Minnesota as part of a crackdown on fraud. Alex Jokic says mental health providers are sounding an alarm now.
More than 1 million Minnesotans are supported by Medicaid. That includes things like therapy and addiction services. This clinic in St. Paul tells me 80% of their funding comes from Medicaid.
When people are here for treatment, the lights are subdued. We have the chairs, we have carpet.
Serving both kids and adults.
We have a lot of PTSD, depression, suicidal ideation, anxiety.
Roots Wellness Center in St. Paul is worried about what's ahead as the state grapples with a massive freeze on Medicaid dollars.
What would happen with the next payment that you're set to get from the state?
I'm guessing we might not see it.
Let's recap. On Wednesday, the federal government gave Minnesota an ultimatum saying the state has 60 days to send over documentation for Medicaid claims from the last quarter of 2025 to vet out any possible fraud. Until then, they'll withhold $260 million. Friday, the Minnesota Department of Human Services told us, quote, "We are still determining how we manage without these significant funds, particularly as the time frame for resolution may be lengthy and complicated."
And the video kind of focuses on mental health resources, but I worked in the disability services community for a number of years, and I can tell you that disability services are another very large component of that. And so folks who need rides to get to the doctor, Medicaid pays for that. The most of the medical insurance and all, especially all of the sort of, if you need a particular kind of wheelchair, if you need a ramp for your home, if you need a particular kind of shower or something like that, that funding is also at a huge risk for with these Medicaid cuts.
Yeah, this feels a little retaliatory.
I think that's a great word for it.
And also, like, it kind of reminds me of when they pulled the daycare money also, where it was like this idea that there is fraud, which maybe there is some, but blanket, like, we're not going to give anything to anybody, even if you're legitimate, seems to kind of be the MO.
Well, that and I think it sounds like if the feds want to review claims, these are for services that have already been provided. So that means the institutions and clinics and therapy centers that have already provided those services are not going to get the payments that they're expecting. I think a lot of the day program kind of positions I've held, they got about 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks of not receiving those payments in, and they'd start to be in trouble pretty quick. So the yeah, and I think it's a good example of for other folks in other cities of the types of kind of retaliation and retaliatory things that the federal government will be willing to do. It might be road funding, it might be Medicaid for your state. So not all of the kind of not all of the devices being used are particularly physical or kind of tangible.
Yeah, they're basically kind of grasping at whatever levers that they can pull to try and influence people there to stop resisting.
Exactly. Yeah. And on the monetary level, at the state level, on the city level, everything.
Wow. So I think that maybe we can move on to talking about the history, and actually, like, a lot of these clips from both this like episode of what we've shown for the update and from the previous episodes, I think that this will give a lot of context. I think knowing the history about what's happened in Minneapolis, like way before any of this ICE stuff, is going to be really telling, because as an outsider, one of the things that I found fascinating is how fast Minneapolis was able to mobilize and how they were already organized in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of that is due to this history, right? So maybe we kind of start at the beginning.
There are many other facets, obviously, of the local politics, and this is just a snapshot. But I think, three of the big important things and kind of areas we'll chat about are Minneapolis and Minnesota in general is a very well organized labor state. Union and the kind of the labor movement has always been very strong here, even like up on the Iron Range and things like that. And the history of police brutality in the Twin Cities is actually not good. And it's had the police here have had a long history, as in many other cities, of kind of murdering a lot of individuals, and some of the mutual aid groups are in fact kind of revolving or started in those spaces. And the third thing is, while it's a very diverse city here, Minneapolis is still an extremely segregated city. And we'll see that in some of the kind of maps we'll look at the end.
Okay, so here's the first article, which it's about labor strikes. And in particular, the kind of first thing that was on the list is that there was a labor strike in 1934.
Yeah, and so while many people have seen the general strike on the 23rd of January, and then a week later on the 30th, where a lot of businesses in Minneapolis closed, as well as across the country in solidarity. One of the other largest labor strikes was in 1934 in Minneapolis. So it, really has a deep history here. And the 1934 strike was one of the largest in the country since the, the January 23rd strike. And during that time, the Teamsters actually started the strike themselves, and they began unionizing truckers, and they did so in direct kind of confrontation with Minneapolis business leaders, which still happens today. And they were looking for shorter hours, union recognition, and some other things. And during that strike, the Minneapolis police did get involved, and 2 people were killed and then dozens injured. Kind of movements versus the police has long been part of Minneapolis politics. There was also quite a bit of kind of like mafia-like crime here, particularly, in Prohibition, and we're real close to Canada, and kind of underground mob networks and crime that I think a lot of people might not be aware of too. So just a fun fact, as long as we're doing fun facts about Minneapolis.
Is there a big union presence there? I'm just curious, since this is was a labor strike. When I think of labor strike, I think of union. And I know that's not necessarily always the case, but I'm just kind of curious if there's a big union presence there, or at the time was there?
At the time, I think, that was kind of the early stages of organizing a lot of the more formal unions that we have today. The Teamsters were certainly one of them. And for folks who don't know, northern Minnesota is also known as the Iron Range, where Bob Dylan's from, if that gives any context. But there's a lot of industry, not quite as much now, but back in the 1930s and 40s, there would have been steel plants and iron mines and shipping through the Great Lakes. So there's kind of a lot of occupations that the labor movement has traditionally formed unions for and in across Minnesota. And our political party is called the Democratic Farmer Labor Party. So it's not just the Democratic Party here. It's always had kind of the farmer and union sort of organizational aspects to it.
Interesting. So it's its own separate political party.
Yep, that is, has a slightly different vibe and slightly different priorities than I think are the Democratic Party writ large, right?
Oh, okay. Interesting. Then I think we're going to get into the history of police violence in Minneapolis, which probably anybody watching this has a very base knowledge of at least what happened in 2020 with George Floyd. But it seems like there was a lot more police violence before that.
And the timeline is, I think, for folks who want more information, is an excellent resource. This was a group put together in kind of response to the sheer amount of police violence that has happened in the Twin Cities, and so there's the 1934 strike. You can see where the deputies got involved. And if you can keep scrolling down, Chrissy, and keep going. So we have some, and I think if you could go back up for just a second to 1968. So community patrols debuted in Minneapolis in 1968. So those are the kind of local neighborhood watch groups that are watching generally both the police conduct and for neighborhood safety. So, many other cities had them around this time too, but, that kind of.
This kind of reminds me of Black Panther Party here. Feels very
exactly. Exactly. So that we did have that kind of going on too. And then we can keep going for a while here. So if you get into kind of the early 90s, Minneapolis had a really high crime rate in the early 90s. And there are a lot of efforts have been made to get that back down. but you can see almost every year there's an incident in the 90s. There's an incident with the Minneapolis Police Department, and some of that, is interaction with the Native communities who had a long time presence within Minneapolis proper.
Yeah, that's what this is, right? Little Earth is
Yeah, Little Earth. Yep. Oh,
indigenous.
you were gonna.
Oh, just that they're
Yeah.
an indigenous community there, right?
Yep, and it's an urban indigenous community, so it's completely within Minneapolis. And then once you start getting into the 2000s, there's been some kind of dialogue and some conversations with the Minneapolis PD to try and, limit use of force tactics, among other things. But as we'll see, there are just a number, Fong Lee in 2006, murdered, and groups of police sort of coordinating attacks on and mistreatment of people of color. The gang strike force was a big deal here because at least publicly they attributed a lot of the crime in Minneapolis to gangs. Who knows if that's true or not. So once we get to 2010, for reference, George Floyd is 2020, obviously, and between 2010 and 2020, the Minneapolis police murdered 10 people. So one a year. George Floyd was the 11th.
Wow.
And some notable names there: Philando Castile, which was 2016 in Falcon Heights, and Jamar Clark was right about then. And I don't know if a lot of folks know, but sort of during, and this was when I was living in South Minneapolis near the square, which we'll take a little tour of in a bit, the Brooklyn Center Police Department murdered a young Black man named Dante Wright during the George Floyd trial. So, that kind of, the police couldn't even stop murdering, brown people during like one of the biggest police violence trials the world has ever seen. So a lot of folks here are kind of very, very just fed up with kind of the police department, the administration of the city, and how the policing has been handled for years. And to segue into kind of that long-lasting and unfortunate history has built many mutual aid groups. For example, when Jamar Clark was shot, there was an 18-day occupation of the police precinct in the neighborhood where he was killed. So those groups had food, supplies, water, marshals, things like that, all organized and ready, and occupied a police station for 18 days. Back in, I think Jamar Clark was 2000. The stupid part, the fucking horrible part is that there's almost too many to keep track of, But that was the early 2000 or 2008, 2009, 2010 in there. 2015. There it is. Got the backup. So in 2015, they occupied the 4th precinct for 18 days. And then during George Floyd, it was kind of those same groups. So, Justine Diamond was killed by police in 2017. South Minneapolis, not far from where George Floyd was killed. And, a lot of the mutual aid then was to keep protests going. So keep sustained and effective protests going for days and days and days at a time. With George Floyd, the city had enough, and kind of just a once over of some of the list of murders within 10 years, on top of the previous history in Minneapolis, really sets the tone for how and why people reacted the way they did. And, having participated in a lot of events during the uprising and surrounding George Floyd, not to minimize the impact of protests, but to provide a different perspective on it. I did not go hungry. I was being handed more snacks than I could eat. There was always fresh water. There was masks. there were posters, and kind of that same sort of system really turned on again when ICE got here. And I think, one of the sayings is, this is what community looks like. And so a lot of, and other cities have this as well, but it's, it's dancing and music and using your voice and being in community with your neighbors, to fight the systems that keep us all restricted.
And I don't want to say I'm shocked that there were this many murders before George Floyd, because it's believable. But it is still information that, as somebody who hasn't lived there, like, I've heard of a few of those names, but overall, like, I didn't know that there were 10, one a year, and that there had already been a lot of organizing and protesting in Minneapolis before George Floyd happened. I just kind of assumed, as an outsider, that that was what really got people to start organizing, but it was happening way earlier than that.
Yeah, and BIPOC led groups have, again, unfortunately had to come together in beautiful ways for really bad reasons. So they're really, BIPOC groups are still carrying a lot of the mutual aid and organized protests that we're seeing during the ICE extravaganza as well.
So we have a video about the history of police violence in Minneapolis, and this is from KARE 11, which is local news there.
According to KARE 11 records, in the last 10 years, 10 people have died at the hands of Minneapolis police. Some of the more controversial cases include the death of 28-year-old David Smith. It happened on September 17th of 2010. Police say Smith, who suffered from bipolar disorder, refused to follow police orders, so officers tased him, handcuffed him, and held him against the ground. Records show Smith suffocated and died. The city of Minneapolis later reached a $3 million settlement with his family. 3 years later, officers shot and killed Terrence Franklin. Officers say he grabbed one of their guns during a confrontation. The city reached a settlement with his family in February for $795,000. And then in November of 2015, police shot and killed Jamar Clark. Officers shot and killed Clark when they say he reached for one of their weapons.
This was an outcome no one wanted.
The city paid his family $200,000.
I miss you so much. Every day.
The city paid $20 million to the family of Justine Rushek Damon. Damon called 911 to report a possible sexual assault by her home. She was shot and killed by Officer Mohammed Noor, who mistook her for a threat. A year later, Minneapolis police shot and killed Thurman Blevins after witnesses saw him walking on the street, shooting a handgun into the air and into the ground. 2 officers opened fire when Blevins tried to run away.
Their decision to use deadly force against Mr. Blevins under those circumstances was authorized.
All of this leading up to this latest case where Minneapolis police are once again dealing with a fatal encounter in the city. Gordon Severson, KARE 11 News.
And, there's kind of just a little bit of the previous, an older pre-George Floyd smattering of what happened. And I'd like to point out a lot of the rhetoric that they mentioned in the video is similar to what we've been seeing ICE use and the federal government use in this circumstance. And this was a documentary produced after in Minneapolis, we call it the uprising. All of the George Floyd's murder and the events, subsequent events, we call it the uprising. So if you hear me refer to that, that's what I'm talking about. Was I think May 25th, 2020 was George Floyd was killed, 24th or 25th. And this is a documentary that was made during and after that gives kind of the, and we'll start it at 19 minutes and 58 seconds.
Operators seized control of the police precinct near to where George Floyd was killed. It is burned to the ground. The police have now lost control of large areas of the city. And the President of the United States addresses the nation via Twitter. These thugs are dishonoring the memory of George Floyd, and I won't let that happen. He assures the state governor the military are with him all the way. He concludes, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. In a humiliating riposte, the moderators of Twitter informed Donald Trump that his message has violated their rules on glorifying violence. In scenes that echo the civil unrest of the 1960s, the governor of Minnesota calls in the National Guard.
My first and foremost responsibility to the state of Minnesota is the safety and security of all citizens. We cannot have the looting and the recklessness that went on. We cannot have it because we can't function as a society, and I refuse to have it take away the attention of the stain that we need to be working on.
After 3 days of rioting, the eyes of the world are now on Minneapolis. And the events that unfold are unparalleled in American history.
Yep. We've got one person being arrested here. We've got, we're good. Put us back where you want us. We are getting out of your way. So just let us know. Wherever you'd want us, we will go. We are just getting out of your way when you're advancing through the intersection. This is among the State Patrol unit that was advancing up the street, saying and scattering the protesters at that point for people to clear the area. And so we walked away. I'm sorry? You're under arrest. Okay. Do you mind telling me why I'm under arrest, sir? Why am I under arrest, sir?
An Afro-Latino reporter doing his job is detained live in front of an international audience.
I remember that.
That is an American television reporter, Omar Jimenez, being led away by police officers.
So you can kind of see a lot of similarities to the footage of the anti-ICE protests, a lot of similarities between how the protesters were treated and confronted in 2020 and how they've been treated and confronted by ICE in 2025 and 2026. So in a lot of ways, Minneapolis is unfortunately no stranger to being threatened by law enforcement, being brutally arrested. There's a lot of precedent for journalists being arrested here. I think they arrested a number of Associated Press journalists as well during the 2020 uprising, and you can kind of see a lot of people in the streets. You know, the National Guard was called out. They were all over the city for a good chunk of time. So a lot of the things with ICE are essentially not, they're things Minneapolis has seen before, and that the majority of the city either participated in, witnessed, or was directly affected by in some way.
Yeah, I specifically remember those journalists being arrested and a lot of what was just shown in that clip. And I remember, like, even watching it now, I felt kind of emotional because I felt really triggered as somebody who worked in journalism about what that meant for like the people that I work with and the type of work that I do too, of like, I thought that this was supposed to be like a sovereign thing. Like you're documenting something for the world and you're supposed to be free from persecution here. But yeah, and we're gonna have an episode about that later, about what's happened in specific in Minneapolis around arresting journalists, and the kind of crackdown on free speech and journalism. We have a video here of George Floyd Square, and this is from Unicorn Riot.
Yep, which was a local independent media outlet that covered the protests. And if you're the 2020 uprising, if you're interested in that, their YouTube is fantastic.
There's a community that exists, and even if the police were to roll over this place, the people will come right back, and the barricades will come right back up, and they're not going to be able to quash this space.
No justice. No streets. No justice. No streets. No justice. No streets.
Let me tell you that the city killed a man. Yes. And that is why we are here. That is why the community is standing for justice and asking and demanding for justice.
This street does not belong to you anymore, city of Minneapolis. You're going to have to negotiate. You're going to have to give us some justice if you want that street back.
After George Floyd was murdered, the barricades went up and the demand went out. And those demands, the Justice Resolution, has played a very, very key role in establishing this as a space of protest and establishing this as an autonomous zone. That's been the reason the barricades stay up.
It's for holding the police accountable, it's for demanding justice, and it's also demanding structural changes and investments into the community.
It isn't any one individual demand, it is a collection of needs and wants from this community saying, these are the things that we need in order to move forward to heal. And it's just talking about the beginning steps.
One of the big things about how things are defeated beforehand, it's when you don't develop processes and systems that can continue to keep themselves up. At GFS, every day there's a meeting in the morning and a meeting in the night. And that has been one of the ways that like community has really, really developed. And like you look around here, you see like bus stops turned into storage, bus stops turned into a people's closet. You see bookshelves going up. You see we've got a medical shed. We've got a greenhouse.
We've got a library. 612 MASH is a medic organization that operates out of the square. And there's this People's Way. This is a public space, you know, it's a public meeting space, and it's a public space of a real like community and joy and unity. And it's a sacred space, you know, and it's a space of grieving and also of liberation. And so for people who are coming in here, you know, people come from all over. It's almost a pilgrimage site in that way. I think it's something really to be said about how the common spaces and collectively maintained spaces have been like eroded by capitalism. You can see this as a return of the commons in a lot of ways.
10 blocks from where Renee Good was murdered is George Floyd Square. So the folks in that neighborhood and all of the residents, it was a very loosely organized group of people, held an autonomous zone for almost 2 years. Where full disclosure, I lived a block and a half from there during 2020 and actively participated in events at George Floyd Square. The neighborhood has never been safer. I will say that. A lot of the mainstream media reports contradict it, but as someone who lived there and spent a lot of time in the space, you know, the neighborhood had never been safer. The community was beautiful. The residents, you know, got in and out just fine, and everyone was on board with kind of holding the intersection and, you know, creating that space of grieving and liberation and Black joy and a lot of those types of things. So, you know, the movements that kept that space intact through the winter, you know, through rainstorms, through all the various kinds of weather we have here, right, are very much still alive and well today. You know, that was, you know, 2020, so less than 6, 7, 8 years ago, that really took place. And you know, I can say that the cops would not answer calls to my house if I had needed to call them or wanted to call them, right? They would not have come for at least 2 years after George Floyd's murder because of the autonomous zone.
Wow.
So yeah, and there was a lot of great community, all kinds of different people, and you know, really a statement and demands to the city that until you prosecute everybody, until there are charges and convictions against all the officers involved, and you know, there's restitution for some of the businesses among some other demands, you are not getting the street back. And to a large extent, they did succeed in that. And the, you know, the fists and a lot of the People's Way, the People's Closet, the library, a lot of it is still there, and most of the Street of Names and the Say Their Names Cemetery are also still there.
I've seen in the coverage of some of this by live streamers and stuff of what's been happening in Minneapolis for the past 3, 4 months, that they oftentimes visit George Floyd Square just to see it and show it. So it definitely looks like it's still there. There's still a lot of stuff that's set up. And I'm assuming like locals do happen upon it sometimes, visit it.
Yeah, yep, it's definitely a forever memorial, and a lot of the art that has been created in response to George Floyd, and a lot of art that was created in the square itself is been preserved and cataloged, and there's some traveling exhibitions and things like that, but still very, very much there, and still kind of a spot of animosity between the city and its residents, particularly those of the South Side.
Okay, so the next things that we have are just a couple maps, and you can speak to these.
So here we can talk about our dear mayor, the one who told ICE to get the fuck out, right? It's a very divided populace, and it's a pretty stark division in terms of the mayoral vote, which we had in 2025. The other candidate, the candidate in orange, was a Democratic socialist named Omar Fattah, who ran on rent control, ran on actually sort of really trying to revamp and somewhat dismantle the police department, and kind of a lot of socialist principles, like let's have affordable health care, let's really get some services for our unhoused neighbors, and things like that. So, and Jacob Frey ran more on kind of the usual political platform. He says a lot and does a little, in my humble opinion. But I like this map because, and the Sahan Journal is an amazing local independent newspaper that does has done a lot of reporting on ICE, and does a lot of sort of neighborhood and kind of BIPOC specific reporting. They're fantastic. So if we take a look at the map, the deeper the orange, the more concentrated the vote for Omar Fattah, who again is a Democratic socialist.
So right in the middle, this one is like the middle. Okay.
Yep, and that's the Cedar Riverside neighborhood, which is predominantly Somali. Not totally, but predominantly Somali. And George Floyd Square is probably, if you follow that kind of dark orange south, George Floyd Square is at the end of that darkest orange. Left.
This.
Little north. It's down in there.
Like in here somewhere.
Like in there. Maybe
near this powder horn.
Yep, exactly. Right where you see that powder horn. And Renee Good was murdered north of that, and Alex Pretty was murdered north of that. So this really describes Minneapolis politics in a nutshell. The income in the orange areas is considerably less annually than in the blue areas. The dark blue areas in the lower left-hand corner are some of the wealthiest. There's large groups of mansions and lakes, and a lot of the money in Minneapolis proper is in those dark blue areas. So you can kind of see a stark divide between, the politics in this one map. And if you look at, we don't have one at this point, but if you overlapped the ICE incident and ICE harassment reports, it would very much mirror this map.
Yeah, makes sense.
Right.
Do you know which part of town that Jacob Frey lives in?
He had a condo downtown, but I'm sure he moved probably to one of those blue areas. During the uprising, he lived near the river, kind of right outside of downtown, which is in the center of this map, and kind of made a speech and ultimately got booed by the crowd, a large crowd. And you couldn't put it more bluntly, but he kind of went back inside and never came out. So he, took the one shot at sort of being a more out front mayor, and has not been there since. So I imagine he lives in one of those dark blue areas.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure in some future episode we'll talk more about Jacob Frey and you know, I have a bias against mayors usually. So
I mean,
I'm
I'm there with you.
I'm usually like, what the hell are they doing? But I've noticed as someone who doesn't live there but who has been following this that yeah, he came out super aggressive in the beginning, and then I didn't really see him out there in the streets like I saw other people, you know, participating in the mutual aid. Every press opportunity he seemed to show up, but not in the other opportunities. And then he also kind of talked out of both sides of his mouth a little bit by saying that he didn't believe in the abolishment of ICE.
Yeah, and he
So
did there was a big abolish the police movement in Minneapolis following George Floyd, and he did a similar thing kind of with his language and his rhetoric during that time as well.
yeah, it's kind of interesting because the people outside of Minneapolis, when they saw him say, "Get the fuck out of our city," people got really hyped about it. Like I saw tons of people posting it on social media and being like, "Look at this badass! Like he's definitely going to make sure that they don't get fucked with." And then I think most people who don't live there kind of forgot about it, you know, and or assumed that maybe he was still doing stuff. But if you were following it closely, you kind of saw that it went a different way.
And,
So
I can tell you that everyone in Minneapolis audibly groaned when he said that. It was like, oh my God.
yeah, that's
would've
so
been the
funny because
reaction here.
everybody else was like, yeah, like fuck yeah, yeah, and like, but you know, if you've lived with the guy and you know what know about him and how he operates, then yeah, it's a giant groan. Yeah, it's funny.
It is.
Okay, and then we have another map here.
Yep. So this is from 2021, so it's a little bit older, but I think still relevant. And it's the map of most to least diverse areas. So the dark green
zoom
is the
out on
most
it.
diverse. And this is from the University of Minnesota Research Center. So the dark green is the most diverse. And the dark red is the least diverse. So you can again see how this kind of mirrors the mayoral election map pretty remarkably.
Well, it's kind of interesting actually that this north part is the most diverse. And then when you look at, like, let me go back to this one, that this is also blue, where I would assume that if it's more diverse, it would have been orange. But
the north side is a traditionally historically Black community, and one of probably the most underprivileged quote unquote neighborhood in the city. And I would venture up, I would bet money also that the crime statistics are the highest in that part of the map. Jamar Clark, when they occupied the 4th precinct, that was in that part of the city.
So this was also the part of town where the guy got shot in the leg and the baby was
correct.
Tear gas during right after Renee Good.
Yep,
right?
Correct.
Yeah, because also we're going to talk more about this guy. He's probably going to be a big topic on our show. But the MN Angry Man, Minnesota Angry Man. When he was on, like, first discovered, when he was on the live stream, it was during that protest where the guy got shot in the leg and the baby was tear gassed. And it was in this part of town. And he was saying that he lives down here.
Yep.
And that he never goes over here, but he had to like see what was going on. And so he came to this other side of town to get involved. So he was kind of saying everybody who lives over here, and he's generalizing, of course, and this is just his opinion. So I don't know if it's fact, but that everybody who's living down here is like not getting involved, or like they're sitting in their house.
I mean, by knowing what I know about the neighborhoods, where the very dark red is, I would say not many of those people. Some of those people might be involved in faith groups, community groups, probably some mutual aid, but I would venture a guess they're not marching in the streets over there.
Mm-hmm.
Those some, I mean, some probably are, but they're
Yeah,
comfortable where they're
I'm
at.
sure we're generalizing, and I'm sure he was generalizing. You know, he's
Yeah,
talking about the people that
yeah,
he knows, and
yeah.
there's probably a lot of people he doesn't know too. But yeah, it's kind of I mean, he was basically like, I never come up to this part, to the green part.
Yeah.
So that's actually pretty interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it's a good map. It tells you a lot.
Yeah.
Quickly.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's like, and it's not exactly what I would have expected given the other map. So that's also interesting. Like, there's more dynamics at play than like what you would naturally assume, you know?
Yeah, and there are a lot of parts of the north side that are more conservative than the south side.
Mm-hmm.
Despite,
Mm-hmm.
the diversity, some of the political leanings are more conservative, especially monetarily. And I think tough on crime means a lot to people who live in an area with a lot of crime.
Yeah. Why we should care, why people outside of Minneapolis should care about all of this kind of history, and also to speak to the timeline that we gave about what had already happened. I think there's some points that, especially with your knowledge of social movements, that you could impart to our viewers and friends about why we should care and why we should be engaged about what's happened in Minneapolis.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that doesn't get covered in the media specifically, and even during the uprising and the autonomous nature of George Floyd Square that went on for a year and a half, the media is not equipped to cover that, and it's not equipped to cover it well. So one of the biggest lessons is a lot of the tactics that are necessary to fight ICE require sustained, hyper-local community efforts that bring people together both in solidarity and joy, but also in resistance. So I think as the ICE agents kind of spread out over the country, begin thinking to yourself, are there any of these networks like this in my city? Or what might my mayor do if confronted with aggressive federal agents in town? And we fortunately got a preview of what our mayor would do in 2020, right, and what the governor would do. So no one, and most people were not surprised when they did nothing. So kind of take a look back at some of those local political moments in recent history, and really kind of start thinking about what organizations and what kind of entities are in place to get some of this mutual aid happening, and kind of I think your point about making broad general assumptions is a really, really good one, and a reminder we can all use as well. Don't assume one neighbor is a certain way because they, you might want to guess that. It's really a go door. One thing that happened after the uprising, and maybe this is a good time to mention it, is the neighbors in South where I was living, they went door to door. And we're like, hi, my name is Megan, and I noticed that you live right by George Floyd Square. I too live right by George Floyd Square. Let's talk about that. And, made a lot of signal chats and group text threads that way when, an event happened in the city. Like there was one night, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something having to do with the charges for the officers involved. So it was several months after the initial uprising. And this is a great example of like the longevity that social movements need, and the longevity needed to fight a group like ICE. Something happened with one of the officers, and the protests like flared up again. So the signal chats are in place to say, okay, we're hearing helicopters. Are you hearing helicopters? They don't sound like the normal helicopters. They sound more. And so through those processes, they figured out, oh, they were Black Hawk helicopters from the National Guard. So in moments of even the tension and flare-ups that we've seen in Minneapolis with ICE, those networks can be really, really helpful in figuring out information. They can be really helpful in figuring out, okay, 3 doors down, someone's kid needs a ride to school. But you don't know that unless you walk down the road. Oftentimes in a city in particular, you don't necessarily know that unless you kind of go door to door and organize and just ask folks what they need. You know, not everybody needs food, not everybody needs rent money. Some people need both, and we learned during the uprising that having those conversations that we're not accustomed to having as Americans. It's like everybody has their own lawnmower, everybody has their own 2 cars. Are so important in times of distress.
Yeah, I think that I could speak for myself too. Like, I live in a pretty dense city where you're around a lot of people all the time, but there is, I think probably this is to blame, really, but like we're not interacting on any sort of like conversational level with each other. And I think people have, and myself included, I'm speaking about myself too, have lost the muscle of like just speaking to people that you don't know. Um,
Exactly.
and so it's a little challenge to everyone to maybe step out of your comfort zone and do it, even though it seems a little scary.
Yeah.
I mean, we usually find that what you were afraid of like doesn't even happen, or it's not something to be that afraid of. So yeah, making small talk even with people can open the door to having that conversation about, oh, we live in the same neighborhood. Is there some way that we can kind of come together to make sure that we're doing stuff to keep each other safe? Because like, even if you don't love your neighbor, like even if they're annoying, you don't want anything bad to happen to
No.
them.
No, and we keep us safe. We keep us safe, and that's the mantra in Minneapolis as well. And I would encourage people too to sort of put themselves in a mind space of being comfortable with doing things not just that you don't want to do and outside your comfort zone, but that are outside the mayor's comfort zone, or outside your city council's comfort zone, or outside your governor's comfort zone. Because as we've seen here, the main political leaders, though they are very progressive, they are, and they've done some wonderful things, both policy and law wise, in both the city and the state. To combat ICE, we had to be comfortable going against both of them and completely dismissing their point of view in order to react to what we were seeing on the ground. And there was sort of a similar kind of decision and moment in time during the uprising. And I think for a lot of people, if you do come into direct contact with ICE, you're going to have to put aside any notions that you had about men dressed in police-like uniforms and women, and you're going to have to find a place of comfort within yourself in kind of going against some of the things that maybe have been um, kind of ingrained in you your entire life. It's like, oh, you follow the law, you listen to your governor, we have elected officials for reasons, and things like that. And what we've seen in Minneapolis is we've had to push back against some of those progressive established people and resources.
Yeah. I also think for people in other places, those maps that we showed you, that's really good information, and every city is going to be like so different. Like we've given you in this podcast an overview of, very surface level of kind of the things that play in Minneapolis, the way it's laid out, and where the different types of people live, and the socioeconomics and all of that stuff. But your city's going to be different, and so I bet you can find maps like that for your own city if you're not already aware. I know, like, where I live, I mean, I've lived here for a long time, so I'm pretty aware of the other neighborhoods, but I don't leave my own neighborhood even that much. So I'm really tuned into what's happening here, but I'm not necessarily tuned into what's happening in the Mission, or what the demographics are over there, or who they've elected for their city council person over there, or so starting to get engaged on those things and just looking for that information is probably helpful, because it gives you a little more knowledge about, if ICE were to come to where you are, you could start maybe thinking through the possibilities of where they're going to target and where they're going to be at, and where maybe the city needs to organize better, or where's going to be a pain point. Like,
Exactly.
so all of the stuff that we showed you is like pretty easily accessible. Like, those maps are pretty easy to find. So try and find those for your own city. And maybe it won't be surprising, but maybe it will be surprising. Like, I thought the
Yeah.
ones in Minneapolis were kind of surprising.
Yeah. Well, and I'll say our city council in Minneapolis has been stellar during this whole time, and really kind of getting a lot of valuable and reliable information out. A lot of the information I get comes from my city council ward person. And before 2020, I didn't know who that was. I didn't vote for them. I had no clue. I was pretty, voted in all mayoral and national elections, but had never taken an interest in the city council or the park board. And another thing we kind of learned in Minneapolis is those people matter. And in the years since the uprising, the turnouts for the city council elections have been completely different, and it is showing at this moment in time. So get a sense of who your representative is, or run if you want, kind of thing. And I can say the city council has been instrumental in the last 5 years in the city. And, they really have been working most for the people in general. I'll add that too.
That's awesome. I do
Yeah.
think also to people who are interested in knowing what their city council is talking about, especially if there's been a threat of ICE or of something else coming to your town. Usually, and I'm speaking generally, so it depends on where you live, there is usually a public feed that is available of city council meetings. And sometimes you're even allowed to comment, even if you're not in person. You can join by Zoom. I'm assuming in smaller towns that might be less available, but it's worth looking into, maybe tuning in a little bit. Now, those meetings, trust me, I have cut about 5 bazillion of those meetings in the films that I've worked on. There's always like a city council meeting, and it's always kind of rough because oftentimes they can be boring. But if you are catching wind that, hey, something might be coming up here, or is wondering, are my council people starting to engage about a plan for if ICE is coming, start tuning in. And I would say even encourage you to participate in public comment.
Well, and it's your right to ask those questions of your local officials. It's your right to disagree with them. And, I think the more we can get comfortable in those spaces, and sometimes uncomfortable in those spaces, the more the voice of the people is heard, right?
I do think also, if you decide to attend any city council meetings in person, it's also a great way to meet other people in your city or town that are also trying to engage. Like, that's why they're there.
Absolutely.
So you'll probably get some bad coffee and maybe some cookies, but try it. It can't hurt.
Well, and that's where
Only
the
thing
policy is made. The city council is where people flooded the city council meetings during the negotiations about how to memorialize George Floyd Square. And the city wanted to take everything down. And they wanted to take all of the art that people had made, and all of the graffiti, and all of the gas station that has been, the owners of the gas station donated it to the people. And the city wanted that too. And the only way that that was avoided was because people flooded the city council meeting.
Wow.
It works. Do it. It works. It totally
the
works.
people
It
have
takes like 4
power.
years, but
The people have power. The people have more, like, you have more power than you think you do. I mean, it's so easy to feel like this is all out of control, because in some ways it kind of is, but you have some influence and you have some power, and so use it. And
Yeah.
you don't have to start by reinventing the wheel and creating a whole new movement or something. Even small things like participating in some local mutual aid or going to your city council meeting is something, so don't talk yourself into that, oh well, if it's all or nothing, like that's not true.
No, and there's no better time to start than now.
That's true. Well, on that note, I think that that we can wrap it up here. And I think if you enjoyed this discussion, please like and subscribe. We will be back with another episode of the Whatnot, and we're gonna keep going until we run out of things to say, I think.
Yep, that's the plan until there are no more conversations to be had and we don't have to go the what now anymore.
Yeah. Also, for anybody who's wondering what the title is from, it's actually like a Midwestern saying, like an exclamation of like when
Like
somebody tells you something crazy.
Yeah, like if I was like, "Did you see the giant dinosaur down at the Dairy Queen the other night, Chrissy?"
The
And
what
you would
now? Yeah.
Exactly.
So now you all know like what it means. And
Yeah.
maybe you'll start using the phrase.
Yeah, get it out of the landlocked. Bring it to the coasts. The what now? Let's go.
Yes, the coasts. The what now?
The what now?
Okay. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you soon. Thanks.